super thrilled to be hosting our first ever discussion with 30-year edtech veteran, one of the people that I first worked for, first learned about compliance from Tess Frazier. Without further ado, please take a minute to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Sagi, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully we'll have a very spirited discussion. It's certainly a timely topic. Ben and I, literally 5 minutes before we started this webinar, were exchanging texts from articles from the New York Times about activities that are taking place literally this week that are associated with the topic at hand. So as Ben said, I've been doing this for a long, long time. And it's a topic about which I'm really passionate. And there's a lot of implications, certainly, for what's happening today, societally, culturally, around the world, specific to AI and the various regulatory frameworks that are being constructed to deal with future challenges associated with AI. So yeah, take it away, Ben.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. And as you alluded to, we're going to talk about some of the upcoming regulation that we've seen drafts come out of both in the EU and the US. Talk a little bit about how we think that is going to implicate our industries and businesses. But first, let's take a step back. Whenever we talk about regulation, whether it's AI related or even just in our day-to-day job, GDPR is a recurring theme that keeps coming up. So help me and the audience understand why, as a company selling software to a hospital in the US, my job today is different than it was a few years ago because of EU regulation and GDPR.
So, I like to say, in the beginning, we in the compliance field had to deal with things like FERPA, HIPAA, COPA, and those are acronyms for some of the regulatory frameworks that you all might be familiar with. It's really only been in the past 10 years that you have had global implementation of regulatory frameworks that are designed specifically to deal with privacy, data privacy related issues. And not surprisingly, the EU led the way on this, and implementation of GDPR. And for those of you who might not be familiar, the GDPR is a sweeping set of regulatory laws that deal specifically with data privacy. And the genesis of that is that data privacy is treated as a human right in the EU. Implementation of GDPR has led to a significant increase in data privacy expectations and awareness. So, and you think about that, how is it that you enforce GDPR? Well, you do it, among other things, with secure systems. And how do you ensure a consistent standard of security among your vendors and your partners? You do that with minimum security requirements and protocols to ensure compliance with those requirements, which leads us to, I think, the reason why many of us are here: an seemingly endless series of security questionnaires or SOC frameworks, ISO frameworks, HECFAT, FedRAMP, StateRAMP. We can go on and on and on. And you look, for example, there are organizations today who are, for example, phasing out third-party cookies, which track your browsing habits, right? That is at least partially a result of GDPR. And it's led to changes globally, and it's had a profound impact on the way organizations handle personal data. And therefore, it has impacted how businesses work. It's not enough to say that you comply with GDPR or any other piece of privacy legislation. You have to prove it. And again, we prove it by answering all of these various questionnaires, these forms. We get certified, compliance badges, et cetera, et cetera. Because of the lack of a national privacy law in the US, GDPR essentially became the global law for privacy. Any organization that had any hope of competing on a global stage had to make sure they were complying with GDPR, which, a lot of compliance professionals like me sort of treat it as the umbrella, right? If we comply with GDPR, then we are, 99% of the way there with every other global framework, national framework, anywhere else in the world. So AI brings it to a whole new level. Any organization utilizing AI technology under existing privacy laws has to prove that they have a legal basis for processing personal data and that they have the necessary safeguards in place. And indeed, many existing privacy laws, may not refer directly to artificial intelligence, but they do refer to automated processing algorithms, which is not so secret code for AI, but they're insufficient. So again, the EU is leading the way and saying maybe we need to do something about this. And as you all know, AI systems are designed to learn from data. So the more data they process, the better their performance. And while AI holds great promise, it also holds great risk, right? Because its proficiency in gathering and scrutinizing and sorting vast amounts of data has the potential, at least, right, for some malfeasance from bad actors, certainly. And it's not enough for us to say, yep, we trust you to do the right thing with all of this data that you have access to. So I would say certainly, EU AI law is still evolving, and it's actually currently under negotiation. The EU Parliament engages in a process they call trilogue, and there are essentially 3 different divisions within the Parliament who are now negotiating to figure out what the final EU law on AI is going to look like. And I think it's safe to say that, true to form, the EU tends to take a very strict and conservative approach about protecting privacy. And we can expect that the EU AI privacy laws are going to be fairly comprehensive and will err on the side of protecting human rights, of which privacy is paramount, right? So the interesting thing for all the rest of us, right, is, nobody wants to have to comply with multiple legal frameworks for the same thing. And I think what the EU is doing by pushing forward with AI legislation has lit a fire under the US Congress, right? It's puzzling to me that here we are almost 5 years after GDPR, and the US still does not have a national privacy law, right? So what we've been left with is this patchwork of state laws that, seem to resemble GDPR in some ways. Certainly, if you look at California, again, leading the way, but they're all different. And so what the EU has done, I think, by working on the AI privacy laws now, is sparked the US to say, wait a minute, right? We don't want to have to be beholden again to the laws of another nation or group of nations. So now we have this flurry of activity in the US Congress. And indeed, just last week, another bipartisan bill has been introduced, and this one is specific to artificial intelligence. And indeed, tomorrow, Senator Chuck Schumer is actually hosting a number of closed-door sessions with all of the big names in tech that you're all familiar with to figure out, how do we do this? Not surprisingly, there are some people who are saying, my goodness, that's like having the fox guard the hen house, right? Having all these tech billionaires come in and say, this is how we should manage AI. Not necessarily, right? I think the US Congress is doing the right thing in that they want to learn, right? What do we need to learn about? What do we need to know? What should we be thinking about here? So let's gather the greatest minds in the industry and see if we can tease out some of those ideas. But at a minimum, I would expect any US data privacy law to focus on certainly things like transparency, right? How do we make sure that we know what's going on? Impact assessments, like we should be making sure that much like many of us conduct data privacy impact assessments, we need to be doing these impact assessments for any AI tool. The EU Act will make it harder for the US to pass their own laws. And as I said before, companies don't want two different sets of rules for different markets. So this, I expect, will be fast-tracked here in the US. Not that they've asked me, but if they did, my advice for US lawmakers would be to do what they're doing. Understand what's involved, understand the EU Act, and look for standards that they can align on to ensure that the laws are easy to implement. I know I've said a lot very, very quickly, but let's unpack some of this and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Great overview of the whole trajectory from GDPR to where we are today, and looking forward at the AI laws that are inevitably going to come out. Now, as someone who watches the news and has been seeing what's happening, I see kind of two categories of regulation that people are pushing for. One is to actually regulate the development of technology, like people who want to slow down what tech companies are building with AI. And another that's to regulate the implementation of technology, which is just, hey, it's inevitable AI technology is coming, but how do we actually make sure they're coming in a safe, secure way? The regulation that's out now, does it fall into one of those two categories? Is it about putting the brakes on the train and stopping development, or is it about how to safely embrace the technology?
Well, I think as you and I have spoken before, I think the EU legislation is certainly taking a more conservative approach. And I wouldn't say that it wants to stop the development, but by the very nature of some of the laws that are being proposed, it will slow things down. Whereas, and again, I think this is not surprising, in the US, there's much more of a push to move forward, perhaps with caution, but let's move forward. We don't want to necessarily stop the development of the technology.
That makes sense. And when you think about moving forward with the development of technology, but also knowing there's regulation coming, do you as a tech company say, let's wait and see? Do you as a tech company say, let's develop at the forefront? How are you as a technology company advising your team to look at these upcoming regulations?
It's a really, really great question. I know of very few successful tech companies that said, let's sit back and wait and see what happens.
Right.
Right. I think the challenge for privacy and compliance professionals, right, is to somehow try and stay ahead of the curve and make sure that instead of advising people to sit back and wait, we're saying, let's move forward, but let's make sure we are doing so with as much knowledge and understanding as possible, right? And therein lies the challenge. And it's always, the legal and compliance and privacy folks who are sort of accused of, slowing things down. And we don't want to do that. So, we have, I think, a very big responsibility to make sure that we are staying aware, staying educated, and sharing that knowledge with our developers and with our exec teams, whoever needs to know, like, here's what's going on. We need to be thinking it, in granular detail, whether we're talking about, product roadmaps or, marketing schemes, sales protocols, all of it, right? We have to be thinking what's coming. And that's our job, right? What do we have to worry about 6 months from now versus 6 months ago?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that you hit on that I've known from working with you for many years is, how do you move from compliance from being something that slows things down to something that helps accelerate and speed things up? And one thing that I know you're very good at is helping businesses use compliance to their advantage and almost as a differentiator. I'm curious, as you now, I'm sure, are inundated with requests internally to look at AI tools that all of your departments want to use, evaluate different systems. What but there are no templates or questionnaires or standardizations for doing it. What are you doing as a company to evaluate what AI systems you'll use even internally, whether it's a marketing tool or a customer support tool?
Another great question. And I think you've heard me say this over and over again. My mantra is, privacy, compliance, security, all of those things are competitive advantages, and they've proven to be competitive advantages. But how do you move forward in the new world of AI when you don't have laws that have been promulgated yet, right? So what we do is we apply some of the standards that we have learned from GDPR. And ultimately, if we are examining the adoption of an AI tool, whether it's working with another vendor, an outside vendor, or building AI into our own products, the question always is, okay, will this use any customer data, any partner data, any employee data? And if so, what kind of data will we be using? And then we follow a lot of the same protocols that we do to make sure that we're complying with GDPR, right? We're gonna sit down and examine exactly what the data privacy impact is on whatever tool it is that we're considering.
It's fascinating. That's fascinating. And I think for a lot of companies that we speak with, they are wanting to say, let's just wait, right? Let's just wait a year and see how things fare out. And when there's a better way to evaluate systems and a better way to look at how this technology is done. What I love about the way you approach it is there's no reason to wait. There's no advantage in waiting. In fact, we have to accelerate how we embrace the technology.
I don't think there's an advantage in waiting. And as a matter of fact, what we have seen, I've seen it in my own experience. Um, if you do, if you do wait, then sometimes you have to retrofit your processes, or worse yet, your products, right? Are you gonna come up with data privacy impact assessments, going 12 months back? I don't think so, right? So better to jump on the surfboard and ride the wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to say it. Better to jump on the surfboard and ride the wave. And if you can embrace that technology, you can certainly accelerate your company and the way you're working on things much faster. I'm curious about those closed door sessions. What literally happens in those? Is that just senators' opportunity to ask tech leaders the questions in a safe space without looking dumb and ill-informed? Is there meatiness to those conversations?
Well, I don't want to editorialize, about senators looking dumb and ill-informed. Um, that being said, I think you're absolutely right. These are not open door sessions. There's, the media won't be there. There'll probably be a handful of observers. And what we learn about those sessions, I think, will be pretty carefully scripted, right? Um, in the past, some of the other privacy related hearings that I've had the fortune to participate in, it's an educational process, right? And I think you'll find that the legislators are asking a lot of questions. you know Even those of us who are in the field, right, we don't have a full understanding yet of the technology and how it works, or at least what the real potential is. And I think that's what our legislators are going to be doing. They want to tease out what's really happening here, and what do we need to do to protect, ultimately, right? I think it's not too dramatic to say our democracy, because again, as we have seen in the very recent past, there are AI tools being used for very nefarious purposes, to influence elections and influence electors, right? So, I think that's sort of front and center for our legislators, but also there is an aspect of making sure, how are we protecting the American people, right? How are we making sure the American people are not being taken advantage of with this technology?
I think that's a good approach for the regulatory bodies to take. Of course, I could also see a situation where there's just conversation after conversation and not much movement. And to your earlier point of this being an opportunity for the U.S. to set the stage rather than be reactive, what would you like to see come out of these closed door sessions as far as immediate action that puts us at the front of the pack, not playing from behind?
Well, I think, I think GDPR left a bad taste in US legislators' mouths because they found that they didn't take action when they could have or should have. And there's a significant amount of pressure on them to be ahead of the curve here. They're not, they're still behind the curve, but I think what's going to happen is that they will be able to get a lot of the information they want so that they can fine tune the existing proposed legislation and get something out there. It's not going to be as comprehensive as the EU laws, because it's got to move pretty quickly. But the fact of the matter is, as you know, there hasn't been a whole lot of broad bipartisan support for much of anything. And
Right.
and the fact that this does have bipartisan support means it will likely move more quickly than one might have expected
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah. And I think that bipartisan support comes for, I think, a few reasons. One, obviously being toward an election year, people want to look at lots of issues together. And two, this is an issue that touches on so many facets of our economy, starting with manufacturing constraints on actually creating the GPUs that are powering all of the AI technologies, all the way through the end user experiences that might, impact individuals on a privacy law. So I think it's as you've said, it's such a technological shift and revolution we're going through that it's not just about cookies on a web browser that are, tracking your behaviors. It's a real difference in how we use technology.
There is no industry, I think, that is untouched by AI at this point. Whether you are looking at fintech, health tech, ed tech, manufacturing, hospitality, they are all being impacted and will continue to be impacted by artificial intelligence. And I think, again, that makes it very easy for the US Congress to say, you know what, this is actually pretty important, and we need to get ahead of this.
Yeah. And it behooves the US Congress to position the US as being ahead of it. I think privacy laws like GDPR, enacting them wasn't particularly a sign of innovation. But when I look at the draft laws that have come out from the Senate, the bipartisan framework, it really reads like facilitating innovation. Like having a regulatory body to manage it makes sense. I mean, you have to register any food or beverage before you can put it on the store shelves. But then as you read into it, it really speaks to, hey, we want this technology to be developed here. We want it to be used here, just within certain guardrails. When I read the EU draft, I think I'm not entering Europe. Like, I read the draft of the EU framework and I think this is so encumbering as a business as far as the number of twists and turns it takes in saying you can't do this and you can't do that. Uh, Help me understand, am I reading them incorrectly, or is that a decent layman understanding of the two draft frameworks?
More or less, and I would say, as complex and I think onerous, is a word that some businesses would use to describe GDPR. Certainly, it creates job security for compliance professionals like me. But the fact of the matter is, there is a place for GDPR in the world, and there's a place for the EU AI proposed legislation as well. Um, you know, if if we are serious about protecting people's rights, and with AI, there is even more potential for people's personal information, to be used in ways that we can't even begin to comprehend at this point, then I think it actually is quite necessary and important to make sure that there are not just sort of general guidelines, but some pretty clear and unambiguous laws about what an organization can and cannot do with people's personal data. Um, and I think it needs to be spelled out very clearly, right? You need to be able to understand what data does company XYZ have on me? I need to be able to know what data they have on me. And I need to be able to correct that data if it's wrong, right? Because other decisions
Yeah.
are being made about me based upon that incorrect data. And then, certainly with GDPR and CCPA, even, that there has to be a cause of action, right? Okay, the data is wrong, or I asked for this, I didn't get it. So what are my remedies, right? What options do I have? I think the difference is, I think the US is, at least at a national level, is trying to be a little more streamlined, again, to make sure that we are facilitating the flow of business. I think it's fair to say that the EU requirements tend to be more onerous, is the word I used earlier. But onerous is often thought of as negative. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it's negative as a business owner, right? There's a whole new layer of complexity. But as a citizen of the EU, I'm sure many of them are thinking, wow, the EU is doing what they can to protect me, my personal data, and make sure it's not used against me. I think in the EU, though, the primary concern with AI, at least to my understanding, is the use of biometric data. For example, in the UK and certainly in France and Germany, they've got the CCTV cameras everywhere, right? Everywhere, on every street corner. And I think there's a little bit of sense of, Big Brother is watching you, and how are you using all of my biometric data? And I think that's one of the primary drivers. And that doesn't seem to be much of an issue here in the US yet.
Yeah, I did see, which stood out to me the most in the EU framework was about identifying every time content is used that is AI generated. And we think about something like Iris and why we started this company. It was because we're often saying the same thing over and over again as humans. And AI provides a great way to synthesize that information, draft responses, and write responses. Does that mean that post EU enaction of this framework, all of Iris's RFP responses are going to have to say copywritten by AI, generated from AI? Do you change one character to get around that, like people did with LimeWire back in the day, of changing the pitch of a song by a little bit?
Absolutely not. And I think the reason for that is because Iris is an enclosed artificial intelligence system, right? Um, all of the data that Iris is ingesting is the data that we are providing to it, right? So it's our data to begin with, our HECVAT, our SOC report, our disaster recovery and business continuity policies, our InfoSec policies. It's not going beyond the fences. And so that's not an issue with respect to our use of the Iris platform at all, from my perspective.
Fascinating. I think derivative work is going to be one of the recurring themes that comes up in AI regulation, like you and I talked about, where someone used AI to generate song lyrics. They fed the AI model lyrics from Bruce Springsteen and lyrics from Billy Joel and came up with new music and said, hey, this is net new music. And they said, no, it's derivative work. And they were like, well, all work is somewhat derivative from other things we've heard, learned from, etc. And how derivative gets defined and how it gets defined of being AI generated versus human generated with some AI tools, I think is going to be probably the stickiest part of this whole process.
Well, I would say IP certainly is going to be a big issue with AI, but there are a lot of other issues that are troubling, right? If you look at AI tools used in HR systems or in hiring systems, for example, there could be reinforcement of negative biases if you're using AI tools, that are looking for patterns, so you really have to be very thoughtful in your implementation of AI tools and thinking about sort of, the content that's being generated. I also think, we chatted a little bit about this. I think it's has the potential to change the insurance industry, because you could find sort of a whole new category of liability for companies, right? That's associated with their use of artificial intelligence.
Definitely. And whether or not a company even wants to absorb some of that liability, right? Of what gets generated from their platform. Like you said, with Iris, we don't know what class generates with Iris because it's your enclosed ecosystem. So, you generate the documentation based on what you've uploaded. And I propose that's partially covered by our terms of service, right? Like as a business, we can hold users to using our software in a very compliant way, but also partially some liability we have to incur as a company.
Yes, that's exactly right. But you will find, I think, one of the things that attracted us very quickly to Iris is, again, the fact that it is an enclosed ecosystem. And so it eliminated a lot of the worry that, we normally would have. And certainly, in going through our process, like, oh boy, right, if we're going to pick or choose to use an AI tool, the fact that it is in an enclosed ecosystem eliminates a lot of the risk for us, because you don't want to put your product architecture map out there into the ether.
Yep, makes sense. I want to take it back a little bit to you and your role and how some of your day-to-day has changed over the past few decades. What GDPR did to change literally how you spend your time, how you staff your team, what kinds of activities you're doing, and then talk about how we think that'll change again. Looking forward to new AI regulation. But let's start with the privacy frameworks. How's your day look different today than it did 10 years ago?
What a great question. I spend so much more of my time today learning and trying to stay ahead of the curve. And that means, whether it's, Google alerts or, scanning industry articles, blogs, whatever, making sure that I am aware of what's coming that will impact my company. And I spend much more time doing that than I ever had to before. But I think the obvious answer to that question is I cannot think of one contract that we have worked on in the past, I don't know, let's call it 3 years, that hasn't included some sort of data security questionnaire or gateway or protocol, something associated with data privacy, data security, compliance, whether it is a $10,000 deal or a $10 million deal.
Yep.
And it used to be, if you could provide an organization with your HEC-VAT, okay, you're good to go, and they could check their box. But I think it's gone way beyond checking the box, right? And the HEC-VAT is not
Yeah.
enough. It's not enough to say, yeah, we're secure, we do these things. People are looking under the covers now. And when I say that, I mean it. A lot of these security questionnaires are asking for third-party audit rights. It's not enough for you to say, hey, we have a SOC report, and that means we have third-party auditors come in and prove that we're doing what we say we're doing. You've got prospects who are saying, no, I want my auditors to be able to come in and see what's going on, right? So I think you have these security teams now at companies, and I work very, very closely with our security team, our CIO, our CISO, and it is an exercise in cooperation and collaboration, right? Because we have to work hand in hand together. I say to them, here's what the law says, and here's what we need to be doing, and they're figuring out, okay, what's the best way for us to do that, right? There are lots and lots of tools out there that help companies do what they need to do. And again, that's where we're spending a lot of time. to set up a lot of those systems takes some time, to do it thoughtfully, to do it the right way. We spend a tremendous amount of time. I spend a lot of time working with our product team. We have to do data privacy impact assessments, not just for new products, but for enhancements, for upgrades, for
Right.
updates. Does this impact the privacy of our users or our employees? Then we've got to conduct a data privacy impact assessment. And those are all fairly recent changes. Like I said, certainly within the past 5 years.
So it sounds like more documentation, more stakeholders that you're serving as far as people who are impacted by regulation and compliance. Like you said, now it matters in the product lifecycle and engineering lifecycle. You're this really important institutional knowledge that has to serve everywhere.
Yes, and I will tell
Um,
you, and full well the reason why Iris is such an attractive solution for class is because we had a lot of folks who were at a fairly high level in the organization who were spending so much time on these questionnaires. And what was happening is the flow of these questionnaires was almost absurd, right? Either they would come to me first,
right.
or they would go to our CISO first, or they would go to a sales engineer first. Whoever got them first would take the first cut at it and maybe get 40-50% of the way through. Then they would send it on to the next person in the chain, who would take their pass at it and get through another 20%. And then they would send it on to the next person in the chain. And it was taking weeks and weeks and weeks to get through these forms. And it was frustrating for so many people. It felt like it was just a waste of time. Like, so much of this information is substantially similar to what we did the last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. And we have all of this data. We have all of these policies. We have these SOC reports. We have these ISO reports. We have our GDPR, everything. And there has to be a better, faster, smarter way to transfer that knowledge into these forms.
Absolutely. And I think that's, in line with what we hear when we speak with business leaders and just folks all across different industries, where it's a lot of repeating the same information. And then you want to update a policy and you have to understand the ripple effect of where that updated policy then impacts other customers and questionnaires. Final question I want to ask you before we then open up discussion for the group is, how do you think this is going to impact AI regulation, the amount of info that you have to share as a business with future clients? Do you think questionnaires are going to become way longer because AI regulation is going to introduce a whole nother set of questions? And how is that going to change your day-to-day as a compliance professional?
So I think the goal for most of the legislators, and I say this for the EU as well as the US, is to make sure that we can use at least some of the existing frameworks that are already in place to manage the AI data privacy challenge. That being said, just by the very nature of what AI does, there will be additional questions, additional guidelines. Probably, on the security questionnaires, we'll see. There's going to be a whole new section.
Yeah.
AI, right? And again, it's going to be gated, right? Do you use artificial intelligence to process our users' data? Yes or no? No, great. End of questionnaire. Yes, aha. Then it opens up a
Mm-hmm.
whole new set of doors. How are you going to use that data? What are you using it for? Are you using it to train your models? Maybe you're not using their individual data, but you're using it to train your models. Then, so yeah, there's going to be, if companies are using the data of their users in artificial intelligence, there will be a whole new set of questions for these questionnaires. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And I guess it all starts with, like we said at the beginning, defining what AI is, right? Because the first part of having to disclose that information is going to have to be owning that you're using it. And right now, all the legislation even kind of defines it very loosely. They talk about automated intelligence or automatic, quantification, things like that. But defining artificial intelligence in those systems will be the first and most important part. Tess, thank you. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Whatever you're going to say.
No, I was just going to ask if any of the participants have any particular challenges in their businesses that they foresee coming down the pike with some of the artificial intelligence regulations that are before us.
Yes, please raise your hand. We can bring you up as a panelist. You can join in if you want some live help. Otherwise, you can also drop it in the chat.
I think we had a pretty comprehensive discussion from minute one. If you guys have any additional questions, Tess, Ben, feel free to drop your emails in here. I'm sure they'd love to chat with you guys. These guys are experts in their industries. I mean, Tess is a force. Ben is one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. So if you have any questions about these issues, they've been studying about it a lot all week. And so feel free to reach out to them directly. Thank you both for this discussion. I've been sitting here like a sponge, just listening as much as possible. It's been really, really informative. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Ben, Tess, anything you guys want to close with? Or are you guys good to go?
I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to say stay tuned. This is rapidly evolving. I can't wait to see what comes out of the meetings tomorrow on the Hill with the tech leaders. There's going to be a lot to unpack here, and it's really interesting and exciting, and we're on the forefront. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tess.
Thank you so much, Tess. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It's great to be here today.
Thank you, Ben. Bye-bye.